The morning Quinn Whitlock watched his barn collapse under the weight of a freak spring storm, he thought his life as a rancher in Jerome, Arizona was finished. It was 1882 and he had spent every dollar he owned on winter feed for his 100 head of cattle, storing it all in that massive structure his grandfather had built 40 years prior. The sound of splintering wood and groaning beams still echoed in his ears as he stood in the muddy aftermath, staring at the mountain of debris that now buried his livelihood. The storm had rolled through Jerome with unprecedented fury, dumping rain that turned the red earth into slick clay and wind that howled like a demon through the copper mining town perched on Mingus Mountain. Quinn was 26 years old, broad-shouldered from years of hard work, with sun-weathered skin and hands that knew nothing but labor. His dark hair was plastered to his forehead as he surveyed the destruction, feeling the weight of failure pressing down on his chest like a physical thing. He had just started rolling up his sleeves, preparing to dig through the wreckage with his bare hands if necessary, when he heard the splash of boots through mud behind him. Quinn turned to see a woman approaching, her skirts already soaked and filthy from the trek across his property. She was perhaps 24 or 25, with auburn hair escaping from a practical bun, and green eyes that assessed the situation with startling intelligence. Her face was pretty in an unconventional way, with strong features that suggested determination rather than delicate beauty. She wore a simple work dress covered by a canvas coat, and she carried a shovel over her shoulder like a rifle. "Heard the collapse from town," she said without preamble, her voice clear and direct. "Figured you would need help digging out whatever you had stored in there." Quinn stared at her, surprised into momentary silence. Women in Jerome were tough by necessity, the mining town demanded it, but most would have sent their husbands or brothers rather than come themselves. "I appreciate the offer, miss, but this is going to be dangerous work. Those beams could shift at any moment." "Then we had better work carefully and quickly," she replied, already moving toward the wreckage. "I am Amelia Crawford. I run the general store in town, and I know you bought enough feed last month to sustain your herd through the dry season. If that feed is ruined, you will be forced to sell at a loss, and Jerome will lose one of its few remaining cattle operations. So stop wasting time arguing with me and show me where to start digging." Her frankness startled a laugh out of him despite the circumstances. Quinn found himself nodding, impressed by her practical assessment of the situation. "Quinn Whitlock, though I suppose you already knew that. The feed was stored in the northwest corner, under what is now about 20 feet of collapsed roof and wall." Amelia planted her shovel in the mud and began removing her coat, revealing arms that, while feminine, showed the kind of strength that came from hauling supplies and managing a business alone. "Then that is where we will start. Do you have more tools?" Quinn led her to his work shed, which had thankfully survived the storm, and gathered an assortment of shovels, pry bars, and rope. As they walked back to the collapsed structure, he found himself studying her profile, curious about this woman who had appeared out of nowhere to help a relative stranger. "Why are you really here, Miss Crawford? We have barely spoken more than pleasantries when I come into your store." She glanced at him, and for the first time he saw something vulnerable flicker across her face before she masked it with pragmatism. "Because I know what it is like to watch everything you have worked for fall apart. When my father died 2 years ago, I inherited the store along with all his debts. Half the town expected me to fail within a month. Some of them wanted me to fail. But a few people helped me when they did not have to, and I am still here because of them. So now I help when I can." They reached the edge of the debris field, and Quinn felt something shift in his chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the sun beginning to break through the storm clouds. He had been managing this ranch alone since his own father's death 3 years ago, and he had forgotten what it felt like to have someone simply show up and offer help without expecting anything in return. "Well then, Miss Crawford, I'm grateful you are here. Let us see what we can salvage." They began the painstaking work of removing debris, starting with the smaller pieces of wood and working their way down to the heavier beams. The mud made everything treacherous, and more than once they had to stop and reassess their approach when a section would shift unexpectedly. Quinn found himself constantly aware of Amelia's position, moving to steady beams before she lifted them, warning her away from sections that looked unstable. She worked with focused determination, never complaining about the physical demands or the filth that soon covered them both from head to toe. As the morning wore on, they fell into a rhythm, developing an unspoken communication about which pieces to move next and how to support the remaining structure. Quinn was impressed by Amelia's strength and stamina, but even more by her problem-solving abilities. When they encountered a particularly heavy beam pinning down what looked like several sacks of feed, it was Amelia who suggested using the rope and a nearby boulder as a fulcrum to lever it up rather than trying to lift it directly. "You have done this kind of work before," Quinn observed as they set up the pulley system she had described. "My father believed that running a store meant understanding every kind of work your customers do," Amelia replied, wiping sweat from her forehead and leaving a streak of mud in its wake. "He made sure I could do everything from shoeing a horse to repairing a wagon wheel. Said knowledge was worth more than gold in a place like Jerome." "He sounds like he was a wise man." "He was. Stubborn, opinionated, and occasionally infuriating, but wise." Her voice softened with affection and loss. "I miss him every day." Quinn felt a pang of recognition. "My father was the same way. He built this ranch from nothing, taught me everything about raising cattle and managing land. Some days I still turn to ask him a question before I remember he is gone." Their eyes met over the rope they were both holding, and something passed between them, an understanding born of shared grief and the particular loneliness that came from carrying on a legacy alone. Amelia was the one who looked away first, clearing her throat and gesturing toward the beam. "On three, then. 1, 2, 3. They pulled in unison, and the beam slowly lifted, revealing several intact sacks of feed beneath. Quinn felt a surge of hope as they secured the beam and began pulling the sacks clear. The feed was damp on the outside but appeared largely undamaged. They worked quickly to move it to higher ground away from the worst of the mud. By noon, they had recovered perhaps a quarter of the stored feed, enough that Quinn could begin to believe he might not lose everything after all. His arms ached and his back protested every movement, but he pushed on, driven by necessity and increasingly by the desire to prove himself to the remarkable woman working beside him. He noticed Amelia was beginning to favor her right hand, though she tried to hide it. "Let me see," he said, reaching for her hand before she could protest. "It is nothing," she insisted, but allowed him to turn her palm up. An angry blister had formed at the base of her thumb, broken and seeping. "That needs to be cleaned and bandaged before it gets infected," Quinn said firmly. "Come on, we are taking a break anyway." He led her to the house, a sturdy adobe structure that his grandfather had built to withstand the harsh Arizona climate. Inside it was cool and dim, furnished simply but comfortably. Quinn directed Amelia to sit at the kitchen table while he pumped water into a basin and gathered clean cloths and salve from the cupboard his mother had always kept stocked with medical supplies. "You do not have to fuss," Amelia said, but her voice lacked conviction. Now that they had stopped moving, exhaustion was clearly catching up with her. "And you did not have to spend your entire morning digging through debris for a man you barely know," Quinn countered, pulling a chair close to hers and reaching for her injured hand. He cleaned the blister gently, aware of her sharp intake of breath, but also of the way her hand remained steady in his. Her fingers were long and capable, the nails trimmed short for practical work. "But I'm grateful you did." As he smoothed salve over the wound and wrapped it with clean cloth, Quinn found himself acutely aware of how close they were sitting, how the light from the window caught the red highlights in her hair, how her eyes were not just green but flecked with gold. He had been so focused on keeping the ranch running that he had barely thought about companionship, let alone romance. The few unmarried women in Jerome were either too young or had made it clear they had no interest in the hard life of a rancher's wife. But Amelia was different. She understood hard work, valued independence, and possessed a core of strength that drew him like a magnet. "There," he said, finishing the bandage but not quite ready to let go of her hand. "That should protect it for now." "Thank you," Amelia said softly. Her gaze dropped to their joined hands, and Quinn saw color rise in her cheeks. I should have brought gloves. I should have told you to go home and let me handle this alone, he smiled slightly. But I am terrible at lying, and the truth is I'm glad you stayed. She looked up at him then, and the air between them seemed to thicken with something unspoken. Quinn felt his heart rate kick up, a warmth spreading through his chest that had nothing to do with the physical exertion of the morning. He was suddenly aware of how isolated they were, alone in his house, with nothing but the sound of the wind outside and the rapid beating of his own pulse in his ears. Amelia broke the moment by standing, though he noticed her hand lingered in his for just a heartbeat longer than necessary. We should eat something before we go back out. You cannot work on an empty stomach. Quinn stood as well, reluctantly releasing her hand. I have bread and some cold chicken from last night, nothing fancy. Sounds perfect. Amelia moved to help him prepare the simple meal, and they fell into an easy domesticity that felt both foreign and utterly natural. As they ate, they talked about the town, the struggling copper mines that kept Jerome alive, the challenges of running their respective businesses. Quinn learned that Amelia had inherited not just the store, but also her father's sharp business sense and his reputation for fair dealing. She had expanded the inventory, started extending credit to families who were struggling, and somehow managed to keep the store profitable despite the economic uncertainty that plagued the territory. You are risking a lot by extending credit, Quinn observed. What happens if people cannot pay? Amelia shrugged, but he could see the steel in her eyes. Then I work with them to find another way. Some pay in labor, some in goods they can produce. A community only survives if people help each other. The moment we start seeing each other as nothing but transactions, we lose something essential. It was that philosophy, Quinn realized, that had brought her to his ranch that morning. She had not come expecting payment or recognition. She had come because it was the right thing to do, because she understood that in a harsh land like Arizona Territory, survival often depended on the willingness of neighbors to help each other without keeping score. They returned to the collapsed barn with renewed energy, working through the afternoon as the sun climbed high and beat down on them with increasing intensity. The physical labor was punishing, but Quinn found himself grateful for Amelia's presence in ways that went beyond the practical value of an extra pair of hands. She made him laugh with dry observations about some of the more colorful characters in Jerome. She challenged his assumptions about the best way to approach certain sections of the debris, and when they finally uncovered a large cache of intact feed sacks in the late afternoon, she actually whooped with delight. Her face transformed by a smile so genuine and joyful that Quinn felt his breath catch. This is at least half of what you had stored, Amelia said, helping him drag the sacks clear. With careful rationing, your herd will make it through. Thanks to you, Quinn said, meaning it absolutely. I would still be standing there staring at the wreckage if you had not shown up. Amelia shook her head, pushing a strand of hair back from her face. You would have figured it out. But maybe it would have taken longer, and maybe some of this feed would have been ruined by the time you got to it. So I am glad I could help. They worked until the sun began to sink toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that turned the red rocks around Jerome into something almost otherworldly. By then, they had recovered what Quinn estimated was nearly 3/4 of the feed, far more than he had dared hope for when he first saw the destruction. His body ached in every possible way, but his heart felt lighter than it had in months, maybe years. As they stood surveying their accomplishment, Amelia suddenly swayed on her feet. Quinn caught her elbow, steadying her. When is the last time you drank any water? She blinked at him, clearly trying to remember. I had some at lunch, I think. That was 6 hours ago. Quinn shook his head, concerned. Come on, you are dehydrated and exhausted. I'm taking you inside before you collapse. Amelia started to protest, but another wave of dizziness must have convinced her because she allowed him to guide her back to the house. Inside, Quinn made her sit while he brought her water and watched to make sure she drank slowly. The light was fading fast now, and he realized with a start how late it had gotten. It is too dark for you to walk back to town safely, he said. The trail down the mountain is treacherous enough in daylight. I will ride you back on my horse. That is not necessary, Amelia protested, though her voice was weak. I have walked that trail hundreds of times. Not when you're this exhausted. Quinn crouched in front of her chair, looking up into her tired face. Please, Amelia, let me do this one thing after everything you have done for me today. She studied him for a long moment, and he saw the internal struggle play out across her features. She was not accustomed to accepting help, to showing vulnerability. But finally she nodded. All right, thank you. Quinn saddled his most reliable horse, a steady bay gelding named Copper, and helped Amelia mount before swinging up behind her. She was so tired that she leaned back against his chest without protest, and Quinn found himself hyper-aware of every point where their bodies touched, of the scent of her hair despite the day's hard work, of the way she fit perfectly in the circle of his arms as he held the reins. The ride down to Jerome took nearly an hour in the growing darkness, following the winding trail that hugged the mountainside. Quinn kept Copper to a careful walk, unwilling to risk a stumble. Amelia dozed against him, occasionally jerking awake before exhaustion pulled her under again. Each time she woke, Quinn found himself murmuring reassurances, telling her she was safe, that he had her. Jerome at night was a collection of scattered lights clinging to the steep hillside, the sounds of the stamp mills providing a constant industrial heartbeat. Quinn navigated through the nearly empty streets to the general store, a sturdy building on what passed for the main road. He dismounted first, then helped Amelia down, keeping his hands on her waist perhaps a moment longer than strictly necessary. Will you be all right? He asked, suddenly reluctant to leave her. Amelia nodded, seeming more awake now that they had stopped moving. I live above the store. I will be fine, truly. I meant what I said earlier, Quinn told her, ducking his head to catch her eyes in the lamplight spilling from a nearby saloon. I could not have done this without you. You saved my ranch today, Amelia. She reached out and touched his arm, her bandaged hand warm even through his shirt sleeve. Then I am glad I was there. Good night, Quinn. He watched until she had disappeared through the side door that led to her living quarters, then mounted Copper and began the long ride back up the mountain. His body was crying out for rest, but his mind was spinning with thoughts of Amelia Crawford, the remarkable woman who had appeared in his moment of crisis and revealed herself to be unlike anyone he had ever known. Over the following weeks, Quinn found excuses to visit the general store more frequently than strictly necessary. Sometimes he needed supplies, sometimes he brought Amelia a basket of early vegetables from his kitchen garden as thanks for her help, and sometimes he simply stopped by to talk. Each visit revealed new facets of her character. She had a sharp wit that could reduce pretentious customers to sputtering silence, but also a deep well of compassion for those genuinely struggling. She read voraciously, borrowing books from the few households in Jerome that had them, and could discuss everything from politics to philosophy with equal intelligence. And beneath her capable exterior, Quinn began to glimpse a loneliness that matched his own, the isolation that came from being young, unmarried, and running a business alone in a rough mining town. For her part, Amelia seemed to welcome his visits, though she maintained a careful distance that Quinn respected even as it frustrated him. She had built walls around herself, understandable given the position she was in. As an unmarried woman operating a business, she had to be above reproach, could not afford even a hint of scandal. But sometimes Quinn caught her watching him with an expression that made his pulse quicken, a softness in her green eyes that suggested her feelings might be developing along the same lines as his own. The turning point came on a Saturday evening nearly a month after the barn collapse. Quinn had been in town to deliver some cattle to the butcher and stopped by the store just as Amelia was closing up. He found her sitting on the front steps, staring out at the sunset with an expression of such profound sadness that it stopped him in his tracks. Amelia? What is wrong? She looked up, startled, then quickly tried to school her features into something more neutral. Nothing, I'm fine. Just tired. Quinn tied Copper to the hitching post and sat down beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. I think we know each other well enough by now that you do not have to pretend with me. What happened? For a long moment he thought she would not answer, Then she sighed, a sound that seemed to come from deep within her soul. Today would have been my father's 60th birthday. I kept thinking I should mark it somehow, maybe visit his grave, but I was too busy with customers. And now the day is almost over, and I feel like I failed him somehow. Quinn's heart ached for her. He understood that particular guilt, the feeling that by moving forward with life, you were somehow betraying the memory of those you had lost. He would not have wanted you to close the store and lose business on his account. From everything you have told me about him, he would have been proud that you were running things so well. Maybe? Amelia's voice was barely a whisper, but there is no one to share it with. No one to talk to about him, to remember him with. I am the only one left who knew him as more than just the man who ran the store. And sometimes that feels unbearably lonely. Without thinking, Quinn reached out and took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. You are not alone, Amelia. I may not have known your father, but I know you, and I care about what you are feeling, so talk to me. Tell me about him. And she did. As the sun set and the stars emerged in the vast Arizona sky, Amelia talked about her father, about growing up in the store, about the lessons he had taught her both in business and in life. Quinn listened, occasionally asking questions, but mostly just being present for her in the way she had been present for him when his barn collapsed. At some point, Amelia leaned her head against his shoulder, and Quinn wrapped his arm around her, holding her as she grieved and remembered. When she finally fell silent, Quinn realized the street had emptied, the decent folks of Jerome having gone home for the night, while the less decent ones were occupied in the saloons and gambling halls. Come on, he said softly. Let me walk you upstairs. Amelia nodded, rising stiffly from the steps. Quinn kept his arm around her as they walked to the side door, reluctant to break the connection between them. At the door, she turned to face him, looking up with eyes that shimmered with unshed tears in the lamplight. Thank you, she said, for listening, for being here. Quinn reached up and cupped her face in his hand, his thumb brushing away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. There is nowhere else I would rather be. Amelia, I think you know how I feel about you, how I have come to feel about you, but I do not want to rush you or make you uncomfortable. So I'm just going to say it plainly. I care about you, more than I have cared about anyone in a very long time, and if you feel anything similar, I would like permission to court you properly. Amelia's breath caught, and for a moment Quinn's heart stuttered, terrified he had misread everything. But then she smiled. A genuine smile that lit up her whole face despite the tear tracks. I thought you were already courting me, Quinn Whitlock. Why else would a rancher need to visit the general store 3 times a week? Relief and joy flooded through him in equal measure. So that is a yes? That is a yes, she confirmed, then rose up on her toes and kissed him softly, briefly, a mere brush of lips that nonetheless sent electricity through every nerve in Quinn's body. When she pulled back, Quinn was grinning like a fool. He knew it and did not care. I am going to do this right, he promised. I am going to court you the way you deserve, and when I ask you to marry me, it is going to be because you know beyond any doubt that I love you and will spend my life making you happy. You are assuming I will say yes when you ask, Amelia teased, her eyes sparkling now. I am an optimist, Quinn replied, then kissed her again, deeper this time, pouring all his growing feelings into the press of his lips against hers. Courting Amelia Crawford turned out to be the greatest adventure of Quinn's life, more thrilling than breaking wild horses or outrunning a flash flood. He brought her flowers when he could find them blooming on the mountain, hardy wild flowers that could survive the harsh climate. He cooked her dinner at the ranch, simple fare but made with care, and she brought bread and preserves from town, and they ate together as the sun set over the valley. They went riding on Sunday afternoons, Amelia seated confidently on one of his gentler mares, exploring the rugged landscape around Jerome. Quinn learned that Amelia loved to laugh but rarely let herself do so in public, maintaining her serious businesswoman facade. He made it his mission to coax out that laughter whenever they were alone, telling stories from his childhood or making ridiculous observations about the territorial governor's latest proclamation. He learned that she was terrified of snakes but fearless about everything else, that she secretly loved romantic poetry but would never admit it to anyone, that she dreamed of one day having a large family but worried she had waited too long. For her part, Amelia learned that Quinn was gentler than his rough exterior suggested, that he talked to his cattle as if they were friends, that he still missed his parents with an ache that never fully went away. She learned that he was scrupulously honest sometimes to his own detriment, that he had turned down lucrative but unethical business deals, that he gave beef to struggling families even when he could barely afford the loss. She learned that beneath the stoic rancher was a man of deep feeling and fierce loyalty, someone who would stand by those he loved no matter the cost. Their relationship was not without challenges. Jerome was a small town, and tongues wagged about the rancher and the storekeeper, who were so often seen together. Some people muttered that Amelia was too independent, that she would never make a proper wife. Others suggested Quinn was only interested in getting his hands on her profitable business. They ignored the gossip as best they could, but it wore on them both, particularly on Amelia, who had worked so hard to build her reputation. The confrontation came 4 months into their courtship, on a hot July afternoon when Quinn came into the store to find Amelia red-faced and angry, practically vibrating with fury as she stocked shelves with more force than necessary. "What happened?" Quinn asked immediately, moving to her side. "Mrs. Henderson was just in here," Amelia said through gritted teeth. "She felt the need to warn me that I was ruining my reputation by associating with you so openly. Said that no decent man would want me if I kept acting so forward, spending time alone with you without proper supervision, as if I am some silly 16-year-old girl who does not know her own mind." Quinn felt anger surge through him, but he kept his voice calm. "Mrs. Henderson is a bitter old woman who has nothing better to do than spread misery. You know that." "I do know that," Amelia said, slamming a can of beans onto the shelf. "But she is not the only one saying these things, Quinn. I heard 2 women in here yesterday talking about how I am throwing myself at you, speculating about whether I'm trying to trap you into marriage." The crude implication made Quinn's jaw clench. Anyone who knows you would never believe such nonsense. "But how many people really know me?" Amelia turned to face him, and he saw genuine distress in her eyes. "I am the woman who runs the store, who extends credit and keeps track of debts. I am not someone people confide in or befriend. And now I am the woman who is courting the rancher. And apparently, that makes me subject to all kinds of vile speculation." Quinn reached for her hands, holding them firmly when she would have pulled away. "Then marry me." Amelia's eyes went wide. "What?" "Marry me," Quinn repeated, his heart pounding but his resolve absolute. "I know I said I would court you properly, take my time, but the hell with that. I love you. Amelia Crawford. I think I have loved you since the moment you showed up at my ranch with a shovel over your shoulder and started digging through debris without asking for anything in return. You are strong and smart and kind and beautiful, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you. So marry me and let those gossips choke on their words." "Quinn, we have only been courting for 4 months," Amelia protested, but he could see the hope dawning in her eyes, the longing she was trying to suppress. "I have known women my entire life," Quinn said. "None of them made me feel what I feel when I'm with you. None of them understood me the way you do. 4 months or 4 years, it would not change how I feel. I love you. Do you love me?" Amelia's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "Yes, you stubborn, wonderful man. I love you so much it frightens me sometimes." "Then say yes. Marry me." "Yes," Amelia whispered, then louder, more certain. "Yes, I will marry you, Quinn Whitlock." Quinn pulled her into his arms and kissed her, not caring that they were in full view of anyone passing by the store's front window. Amelia kissed him back with equal fervor, her arms wrapping around his neck. And for a long, perfect moment, nothing else existed except the two of them and the love that had grown between them against all odds. They married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony performed by Jerome's circuit preacher, with half the town attending despite, or perhaps because of, the gossip that had preceded it. Amelia wore a simple white dress she had sewn herself, and Quinn wore his best suit, the one he saved for funerals and the rare formal occasion. They spoke their vows in steady voices, promising to love and honor each other until death parted them, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Quinn kissed his bride with such obvious devotion that even the most hardened gossip could not doubt the sincerity of their feelings. The celebration afterward was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard, and food contributed by seemingly everyone in Jerome. There was fiddle music and dancing, and Quinn waltzed his new wife across the makeshift dance floor as the sun set over the mountains, feeling happier than he had ever believed possible. Amelia glowed with joy, her face flushed, and her eyes sparkling as he spun her around, and Quinn sent up a silent prayer of thanks to whatever divine providence had sent her to him on that desperate morning when his barn collapsed. Merging their lives proved easier than either had anticipated. They decided that Amelia would continue running the store, with Quinn helping out when ranch work allowed. This arrangement raised some eyebrows, but by then they had learned to ignore public opinion. Amelia moved into the ranch house, bringing her books and her father's old desk and transforming the rather stark bachelor dwelling into a real home. She planted flowers in window boxes and hung curtains and filled the kitchen with the scent of baking bread. Quinn found himself rushing through his morning chores just to get back to the house where Amelia would be, greeting him with a smile and a kiss that made his heart race. Their first year of marriage was not without challenges. That fall, a drought struck the territory, and Quinn's water sources began to dry up. He had to sell off a portion of his herd earlier than planned, taking a loss on the sale. Amelia's store faced its own crisis when one of her largest suppliers went bankrupt, leaving her with unfulfilled orders and angry customers. But they faced each challenge together, pooling their resources and their knowledge, and somehow they always found a way through. In the spring of 1884, Amelia told Quinn she was pregnant. He whooped with joy and picked her up, spinning her around the kitchen until she was laughing and pleading with him to put her down. From that moment, Quinn treated her like she was made of spun glass, trying to do all the heavy work himself and worrying constantly about her health. Amelia found his protectiveness endearing, if occasionally frustrating, patiently reminding him that pregnancy was not an illness, and she was perfectly capable of running the store and managing the household. Their son was born in December during a cold snap that left frost on the windows of the ranch house. The labor was long and difficult, and Quinn paced the kitchen floor while the midwife and 2 neighbor women attended Amelia in the bedroom. When he finally heard the baby's cry, strong and lusty, he nearly collapsed with relief. The midwife emerged to tell him he had a healthy son, and when he was finally allowed into the room, Quinn found Amelia propped against pillows, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. "Meet your son," she said softly, and Quinn approached as if walking on sacred ground. When she placed the baby in his arms, Quinn looked down at the small, red, scrunched-up face and felt his heart expand in a way he had not known was possible. This tiny person was his and Amelia's, a whole new life they had created together. "He is perfect," Quinn whispered, awed. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names endlessly during the pregnancy, never quite settling on anything. But now, looking at her husband holding their son with such tenderness, Amelia knew exactly what felt right. "James," she said, "after your father. James Crawford Whitlock." Quinn's eyes filled with tears. He had not cried when his own father died, had held himself together through sheer force of will. But now, holding his newborn son who would carry his father's name forward, the emotion overwhelmed him. "Thank you," he managed. "That is perfect." James was a good baby, healthy and strong, with his mother's green eyes and his father's dark hair. Quinn proved to be a devoted father, rising in the night to bring the baby to Amelia for feeding, changing diapers without complaint, singing off-key lullabies that somehow always soothed James back to sleep. Amelia watched her husband with their son and fell in love with him all over again, seeing new dimensions to the man she had married. Life settled into a new rhythm after James's birth. Amelia hired a young woman named Sarah to help mind the baby and the store during busy hours, freeing her up to focus on the more complex aspects of running the business. Quinn's herd had recovered from the drought, and he was able to expand his operation, buying additional grazing land from a struggling neighbor. They were not rich by any means, but they were comfortable, and more importantly, they were happy. 2 years after James was born, Amelia became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and their daughter entered the world on a bright May morning with far less drama than her brother had. They named her Catherine, after Amelia's mother, and she proved to be as calm and content as James had been fussy and demanding. Quinn joked that they had been given one of each temperament so they could learn all the ways children could challenge their parents. The years passed in a blur of hard work and small joys. James grew into a sturdy little boy who followed his father everywhere, already showing an interest in the cattle and the land. Catherine was quieter, more bookish like her mother, content to sit in the store and stack cans or flip through the pages of the catalogs. Quinn and Amelia's love deepened and matured, becoming something even stronger than the passionate romance of their courtship. They knew each other's rhythms and moods, could communicate with a glance across a crowded room, worked together with the ease of long practice. In the fall of 1889, disaster struck Jerome in the form of a massive fire that swept through the business district, destroying nearly a dozen buildings, including several saloons, the post office, and the general store. Quinn was out on the range when it happened, and he rode back to town to find Amelia standing in the street, covered in soot, staring at the smoking ruins of the building her father had built, and she had worked so hard to maintain. "The children?" Quinn asked urgently, dismounting before Copper had fully stopped. "Safe. Sarah had them at the ranch." Amelia's voice was hollow, shocked. "I got out with the cash box and the ledgers, but everything else is gone. The inventory, the fixtures, everything my father built." Quinn pulled her into his arms, holding her tight as she finally broke down, sobbing against his chest. He looked at the destruction over her shoulder, his mind already working through the practicalities. They had some savings, but not enough to rebuild from scratch. The inventory alone would cost more than they had liquid. But as he held his weeping wife, Quinn remembered a morning 7 years ago when she had shown up at his ranch without being asked, ready to help dig through the rubble of his collapsed barn. "We will rebuild," he said firmly. "I have some money saved, and we can take out a loan for the rest. The building is gone, but you still have the land and your reputation and customers who depend on you. We will rebuild, Amelia, together." She looked up at him, her face streaked with tears and soot. "It will take everything we have. We might lose the ranch if the store does not succeed." "Then we had better make sure it succeeds," Quinn said with more confidence than he felt. "You did not give up on me when my barn collapsed. I'm certainly not giving up on you now." The rebuilding process was grueling. They took out a substantial loan from the Territorial Bank using the ranch as collateral. Quinn sold off a portion of his herd to raise additional capital. Amelia worked with suppliers to establish new credit terms, leveraging the relationship she had built over years of honest dealing. They hired local men to construct a new building, larger and more fire-resistant than the old one, with proper brick walls and a metal roof. For 6 months, Amelia ran a makeshift operation out of a tent, selling a limited inventory while the new store took shape. Quinn divided his time between the ranch and town, helping with construction whenever ranch work allowed. James and Catherine, now 5 and 3, were often underfoot, but the community rallied around them. Neighbors brought meals, offered free labor, extended their own credit without being asked. It was exactly the kind of community support Amelia had always believed in, now returned to her when she needed it most. The new store opened in the spring of 1890, and it was magnificent. The interior was spacious and well organized, with tall shelves and wide aisles and large windows that let in abundant light. Amelia had designed it herself, incorporating all the improvements she had dreamed about during the years of working in her father's cramped, dark building. On opening day, it seemed like all of Jerome turned out to celebrate, and Amelia stood behind the counter with tears in her eyes, overwhelmed by the support and by what they had accomplished. That night, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Quinn found Amelia standing on the porch, looking out at the lights of town below. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "You did it," he said softly. "You rebuilt what was lost and made it even better." "We did it," Amelia corrected, turning in his arms to face him. "I could never have done this without you, Quinn. When I stood there looking at the ruins, all I could think was that I had failed, that I had let my father down. But you would not let me give up. You believed in me even when I did not believe in myself." Quinn cupped her face in his hands, thumbs brushing tenderly across her cheekbones. "That is what you did for me 7 years ago. You showed up when I needed help, and you did not stop until the job was done. I was just returning the favor." "It is more than that," Amelia insisted. "It is us. The way we have always been there for each other through everything. The barn, the drought, the fire, having children. Every challenge we faced together. And that is why we are still standing when so many others have given up and left." "I love you," Quinn said, meaning it with his whole heart. "More now than the day I married you, which I would not have believed possible back then." "I love you too," Amelia replied, then kissed him deeply, passionately, with the fervor of two people who had been through fire, literal and metaphorical, and emerged stronger for it. The 1890s brought new challenges and new joys. The copper mines that sustained Jerome began to play out, and the population started to decline as miners sought work elsewhere. But Amelia's store adapted, expanding into mail order business and serving the ranching families scattered across the surrounding mountains. Quinn's cattle operation thrived, benefiting from the improved breeding stock he had invested in and the additional grazing land he had acquired. James and Catherine grew into remarkable children, bright and curious and kind. James was fearless, always climbing something or riding something, giving his parents constant heart attacks but also constant joy. Catherine was thoughtful and observant, with a gift for mathematics that astounded her parents. They had a third child in 1892, another boy they named Samuel, who proved to be a perfect blend of his siblings' temperaments, adventurous but thoughtful, bold but careful. In 1895, when Quinn was 39 and Amelia 37, they sat on their porch one evening after the children had gone to bed, watching the sunset paint the Arizona sky in impossible colors. 13 years had passed since the morning Amelia showed up at the ranch with a shovel, ready to help dig through the rubble of Quinn's collapsed barn. 13 years since they had worked side by side, discovering in each other something neither had known they were looking for. "Do you ever think about that day?" Quinn asked, reaching for Amelia's hand. "The day the barn collapsed?" Amelia smiled, squeezing his fingers. "All the time. I think about how close I came to not going, to deciding it was not my place to help. I almost talked myself out of it 3 times on the walk up the mountain." "What made you keep going?" "Honestly," Amelia turned to look at him, her green eyes soft in the fading light. "Something told me I needed to be there. Call it intuition or fate or divine providence, but I knew that morning that something important was going to happen if I just kept walking. And I was right, though not in any way I could have imagined. I thought I was going to help save your ranch. I did not realize I was going to find the love of my life." Quinn brought her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles tenderly. "I remember thinking you were the most stubborn, impractical, wonderful woman I had ever met. Who else would show up to dig through dangerous debris wearing their good dress and carrying a single shovel?" "It was not my good dress," Amelia protested, laughing. "It was my second best dress. I had some sense of propriety." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, holding hands and watching the stars emerge. From inside the house came the sounds of their children settling down for the night, Sarah moving quietly between rooms to check on them. The cattle were lowing softly in the near pasture, And somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. "We have built a good life," Quinn said eventually. "Better than I ever dreamed possible." "We have," Amelia agreed. "And we are not done yet. James wants to start learning ranch management seriously, says he wants to run the operation someday. Catherine asked me yesterday if she could start handling the store's bookkeeping, and Samuel announced that he wants to be both a rancher and a storekeeper because he cannot decide which is more important." Quinn laughed, the sound rich and warm. "That sounds like our Samuel. He wants to do everything." "He gets that from his father," Amelia said, nudging Quinn's shoulder affectionately. "The man who runs a ranch and helps run a store and somehow finds time to teach all 3 children to ride and rope and read." "And from his mother," Quinn countered. "The woman who runs a store and manages our books and raises our children and still finds time to help every struggling family in Jerome." They fell silent again, and Quinn thought about all the years stretching behind them, all the challenges they had faced and overcome together. The collapsed barn that had brought them together seemed almost like a blessing now, a disaster that had forced him to accept help and open the door to a love he had not known he was seeking. "Thank you," Quinn said suddenly, urgently, pulling Amelia closer. "For that day, for all the days since, for being stubborn enough to show up when I needed help, for loving me, for building this life with me." Amelia turned in her chair, reaching up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the lines that time and sun had etched around his eyes. "There is nowhere else I would rather be," she said softly. "No other life I would rather have lived. You and our children, this ranch, the store, all of it. This is everything I ever wanted even before I knew I wanted it." Quinn kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise, the same promise they had made to each other 13 years ago when they spoke their wedding vows. To love, to honor, to stand together against whatever challenges life might bring. They had kept that promise through drought and disaster, through financial struggles, and the exhausting work of building a life from scratch in an unforgiving land. And they would continue to keep it for all the years to come. As the stars wheeled overhead and the night deepened around them, Quinn and Amelia sat together on their porch, hands clasped, hearts joined, 2 people who had found each other in the most unlikely circumstances and built something extraordinary from that first morning when a barn collapsed and buried all his feed, and she dug beside him until they found it all. It was more than just a story of disaster and recovery. It was a story of 2 lonely people who discovered that together they were stronger than either could be alone, that love could be found in the most unexpected places, and that sometimes the greatest treasures emerged from the rubble of what you thought you had lost. Years continued to unfold with their particular mix of joy and challenge. James took over more responsibility for the ranch, working alongside his father and proving to have an instinctive understanding of cattle and land management. By the time he was 18 in 1902, he was effectively running much of the daily operation, allowing Quinn to step back slightly and focus on the larger strategic decisions. Catherine's mathematical mind had indeed proven invaluable in the store, and by 16 she was handling all the accounts with a precision that impressed even the territorial tax collectors. Samuel, true to his childhood declaration, split his time between both enterprises, acting as a bridge between his siblings and helping coordinate the complicated logistics of running 2 interconnected businesses. The children grew into adults who made their parents proud, not just for their competence, but for their character. James married a teacher from Prescott in 1904, a smart young woman named Helen, who immediately charmed the entire family. Catherine showed no interest in marriage, declaring at 20 that she was far too busy with the store's expansion plans to be bothered with courting, a statement that made Amelia smile with recognition of her younger self. Samuel seemed to be courting half the eligible young women in the territory, unable or unwilling to settle on any single one, much to his father's amused exasperation. In 1906, James and Helen gave Quinn and Amelia their first grandchild, a girl they named Amelia Catherine. Quinn held his granddaughter for the first time and felt the same overwhelming surge of love and protectiveness he had experienced with his own children. Amelia cried happy tears. touched beyond words that her son had chosen to honor both her and her daughter with his child's name. By 1908, the ranch had expanded to 3 times its original size, and the store had opened a second location in the growing town of Cottonwood. Quinn was 52, his dark hair now liberally streaked with gray, his face deeply lined by decades under the Arizona sun. But he was healthy and strong, still able to work a full day and ride the boundaries of his property. Amelia was 50, her auburn hair fading to a distinguished silver red, her figure softened by age and childbearing, but her spirit as sharp and determined as ever. They had survived fires, droughts, economic panics, and all the other challenges that Arizona Territory threw at them. Statehood was being discussed seriously now, with optimistic projections that it might happen within the next few years. Quinn and Amelia would sometimes sit on their porch, the same porch where they had spent so many evenings over the decades, and marvel at how much had changed since that morning in 1882 when a barn collapsed and altered both their lives forever. "Do you have any regrets?" Quinn asked one evening, a question that had been on his mind as they both approached their 6th decade. Amelia considered carefully, as she always did with important questions. "I regret that my father did not live to see what became of the store, to meet his grandchildren. I regret that we lost those years to the fire, that the original building he built is gone. But regrets about the life we have built together? Not a single one. You? I regret that I wasted so much time being lonely before you came along," Quinn said honestly. "I wish I had found you sooner, that we could have had even more years together, but I am grateful for every single day we have had, and I look forward to every day we will have." "We are not done yet," Amelia said firmly. "We have grandchildren to spoil, businesses to run, a territory that is about to become a state. There is still plenty of living to do." And there was. Quinn and Amelia watched Arizona achieve statehood in 1912. Celebrating with the rest of Jerome as the territory they had helped build officially joined the Union. They watched their children marry and have children of their own. Catherine eventually did marry at 31 to a mining engineer named Robert, who appreciated her brilliance and supported her continued involvement in the store. Samuel finally settled down at 25 with a rancher's daughter from Flagstaff, bringing yet another generation into the family business. Through it all, through every milestone and every challenge, Quinn and Amelia remained each other's constant. They were partners in every sense of the word, sharing decisions and responsibilities, supporting each other through difficulties, celebrating successes together. Their love, which had begun with physical attraction and developed through shared crisis, had matured into something profound and unshakable, a bond that had been tested by time and circumstance and had only grown stronger. On a cool December morning in 1914, Quinn woke early as he always had, despite being 58 and no longer needing to personally check on the cattle before dawn. The ranch was now firmly in James's capable hands, with Samuel's help. But old habits died hard. He turned to look at Amelia, still sleeping beside him, her face peaceful in the dim pre-dawn light. 32 years of marriage, he thought with wonder. 32 years since she had agreed to be his wife, and more than that since she had first appeared at his collapsed barn with determination in her eyes and a shovel in her hands. He reached out and gently touched her hair, now more silver than auburn, but still as soft as it had been when they were young. Amelia stirred, opening her eyes and smiling when she saw him watching her. "Why are you awake so early?" she murmured, her voice still rough with sleep. "Just thinking," Quinn replied, pulling her closer. "Remembering." "Good memories, I hope." "The best." He kissed her forehead, breathing in the familiar scent of her. "I was thinking about that first day. How terrified I was when I saw the barn collapse, how certain I was that I had lost everything. And then you appeared, like an answer to a prayer I had not known to say." Amelia shifted so she could look at him properly. "I was terrified too, you know. Not of the physical work, but of why I was really there. I had noticed you before. When you came into the store, you were always so serious, so focused, but there was kindness in how you treated people. I found myself looking forward to your visits, hoping you would linger and talk. When I heard about the barn, I told myself I was going to help because it was the right thing to do, but the truth was I wanted an excuse to be near you, to talk to you without the formality of a business transaction. Quinn stared at her in surprise. In 32 years of marriage, she had never quite told him that. You never said. I was embarrassed, Amelia admitted, smiling at her younger self's foolishness. It seemed so forward, so improper. A respectable woman did not chase after a man, even if she was already managing a business by herself. But when I heard about the disaster, I realized I had been given an opportunity. I could help you and spend time with you, and no one could criticize me for being charitable. So you had ulterior motives, Quinn teased, delighted by this revelation. The worst kind, Amelia agreed, her eyes sparkling. I was plotting to steal your heart while pretending to save your livelihood. It worked, Quinn said, pulling her even closer, marveling that after all these years she could still surprise him, still make his heart race. You stole my heart that very first day, though it took me a while to realize it, and you saved far more than my livelihood. You saved me from a lonely life, from the slow hardening that happens when you wall yourself off from connection. You gave me everything, Amelia, a home, a family, a partnership, everything that matters. Amelia's eyes filled with tears, happy ones that she did not try to hide. You gave me the same. I thought I was content before you, thought running the store and honoring my father's memory was enough. But you showed me what it meant to truly share your life with someone, to build something together that neither of us could have created alone. Our children, our grandchildren. The businesses we have grown, all of it exists because we found each other that day. They lay together in the growing light, holding each other close. Two people who had built an extraordinary life from the rubble of a collapsed barn and the courage to reach out for connection when it was offered. Later, there would be breakfast to prepare and grandchildren to visit and 1,000 small tasks that made up their days. But for now, in the quiet morning, there was just the two of them, Quinn and Amelia Whitlock, rancher and storekeeper, partners and lovers, two halves of a whole that had been forged in the hard country of Arizona and tempered by decades of shared experience. The years ahead would bring new challenges. The country would go to war, and they would watch their grandsons march off to fight in Europe, spending agonizing months waiting for news. The war would end, and most of their boys would come home, changed, but alive. The 1920s would bring prosperity and then depression, boom and bust cycles that would test their business acumen. But through it all, Quinn and Amelia would remain each other's anchor and each other's comfort, facing everything together as they always had. In the spring of 1932, 50 years after a spring storm collapsed a barn and brought two lonely people together, Quinn and Amelia celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary. Their children and grandchildren, along with what seemed like half of Jerome, gathered at the ranch for a party that lasted well into the night. James gave a toast, his voice breaking with emotion as he talked about parents who had shown him what real love looked like, what it meant to be partners in every sense. Catherine read a poem she had written about two people who had turned disaster into destiny. Samuel simply hugged them both and said they were the best example anyone could ask for. Late in the evening, after most of the guests had departed and only family remained, Quinn led Amelia away from the house, up a gentle rise to the spot where his grandfather's barn had once stood. A new barn had been built decades ago, in a different location with better drainage, modern construction. But Quinn had left this spot empty, letting wildflowers reclaim it, and it had become a kind of sacred space for them, a reminder of where their story had begun. They stood together in the starlight, arms around each other, looking out over the land they had built their life on. Quinn was 76 now, Amelia 74, both of them feeling every year in their bones, but grateful for each one they had been given. Their children were settled and successful, their grandchildren were growing into fine young men and women, and the businesses they had built were thriving even in difficult economic times. 50 years, Amelia said softly. Half a century since I showed up with that shovel. Best decision you ever made, Quinn said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "Best decision we both made," Amelia corrected. "You could have sent me away, told me you did not need help. But you let me in, let me help, let me prove myself. And then you loved me, truly and completely, for all these years." Quinn turned her in his arms so he could see her face in the moonlight. She was still beautiful to him, perhaps more beautiful now than she had been at 24, because her face held all their shared history, every laugh and tear and triumph and loss. "I will love you until my last breath," he said seriously. "And if there is anything beyond that, I will love you there too. You are my heart, Amelia. You always have been." Amelia reached up and cupped his weathered face in her hands. "And you are mine, my partner, my love, my greatest adventure. When I dig through the rubble of my life looking for what matters most, it is always you, Quinn. It has always been you." They kissed then, under the stars, on the spot where a barn had once collapsed and buried all his feed, where she had dug beside him until they found it all, where their story had truly begun. It was a kiss that held 50 years of love and partnership, of challenges overcome and joys shared, of a life built together through determination and faith and the simple, profound commitment to face everything side by side. And when they finally pulled apart and walked back down the hill toward the house full of family and light, they walked hand in hand, just as they had walked through every day of their 50 years together. Whatever time they had left, whether it was years or decades, they would face it the same way they had faced everything since that spring morning in 1882 together, always together, bound by a love that had proven stronger than any storm, any disaster, any challenge life could throw at them. Their story would become family legend passed down through generations. Great-grandchildren would hear about the barn that collapsed and the woman who showed up to help dig, about how a disaster became a blessing, about how two people found each other when they needed each other most. They would hear about the drought and the fire, about rebuilding and persevering, about a partnership that lasted half a century and beyond. Quinn Whitlock passed away peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1938, at the age of 82, with Amelia holding his hand. His last words were, "I love you," spoken with the same conviction he had shown the day he first said them 56 years earlier. Amelia mourned him deeply, the loss of her partner leaving a hole in her heart that nothing could fill. But she did not break. She had learned too much about strength and resilience over their years together to give up on life just because he was gone. She lived another 5 years, staying active in the store that Catherine now ran, spending time with her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, keeping Quinn's memory alive through stories and love. And when she joined him in the spring of 1943 at the age of 86, her family found comfort in the knowledge that they were together again, reunited after a separation that had been brief in the context of eternity. They were buried side by side on a gentle slope overlooking the ranch, with a simple headstone that read, "Quinn Whitlock, 1856-1938, and Amelia Crawford Whitlock, 1857-1943, together in life, together in death, partners always." The spot became a place of pilgrimage for their descendants, a reminder of what two people could build when they chose to face life's challenges together with love and determination. The businesses they built continued to thrive through the generations. The ranch remained in the family, passed down through James and his children, adapting to changing times but maintaining the core values of honest dealing and hard work that Quinn had instilled. The store, modernized and expanded, remained a Crawford family operation, with Catherine's daughter and then her granddaughter taking the helm, each generation honoring Amelia's commitment to serving the community and supporting those in need. In the end, Quinn and Amelia's greatest legacy was not the land or the businesses or even the large family they had created. It was the example they set of two people who met during a crisis and chose to build rather than retreat, to love rather than guard their hearts, to face every challenge together rather than alone. They proved that disaster could become destiny, that helping a stranger could change your life, that love found in unexpected places could be the strongest and most enduring kind. Their story lived on in Jerome, in the ranch that still bore the Whitlock name, in the store that still served the community, in the descendants who carried their blood and their values into the future. And on spring mornings when storms rolled through the Arizona mountains, some of those descendants would think of a barn that collapsed in 1882, of a woman with a shovel who appeared in the aftermath, of two people who dug through debris together and found not just feed for cattle, but the foundation for a great love story. It was a reminder that the most important things in life often emerged from the most difficult circumstances, that helping someone in need could change both your lives. And that true partnership meant showing up, digging in and never giving up until you found what mattered most together.